Hey everyone, Editing Val popping in just to let you know that something weird happened. The right microphone was selected, but the wrong microphone recorded. I don't know what the deal was, but it was only on my end. So the good news is our guest microphone is perfect. You're here to hear her, not me, so it all comes out in the wash in the end, but there's a little bit of a microphone discrepancy. So on with the show. You're listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. It is one of my dreams come true to host today's guest. But before we get into that, I'm just going to announce that time is creeping up on us, and March 28th and 29th, I will be speaking at the 5th Annual Overflow Ministry Women's Conference. I think I got all of the words in there. In Bone Steel, South Dakota, there are still tickets available. There will be a link to that event in the description. I would love to meet you, would love to see you there. I went last year for the first time. Now I'm speaking. It's going to be so great. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there. If you have tickets or can get them, Bone Steel, South Dakota, the end of March. Also, if you're not already following us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, I would encourage you to follow, subscribe, all of the things so that we can get in front of more moms who need encouragement. Now, this episode is the gold mine jackpot of encouragement. This guest I have been wanting since the podcast began. RuthAnn Zimmerman of Homesteading with the Zimmermans has been an encouragement to me for years and years on the other side of my telephone screen. And now I have the pleasure of introducing her to you, the listener of the Motherhood Experience podcast. She's going to share with us her motherhood story, her faith journey. We talk a little bit about homesteading because you have to. I had RuthAnn in front of me. I couldn't not talk about homesteading. So we covered that as well. This, hands down, one of my favorite episodes ever. So I'm excited right now to launch into the conversation that I was fortunate enough to have with my guest, RuthAnn Zimmerman.
It is a thrill of all thrills for me. You may know her from YouTube or Instagram as Homesteading with the Zimmermans. RuthAnn, welcome to the Motherhood Experience.
I am so happy to be here, Val.
This is a real treat for me, and we have gone back and forth communicating to make it work out, and I'm just so thrilled. And we start every episode with ages of kids and stage of motherhood you're in. So why don't you run down that list for us?
Okay, so I am in my 24th year of being a mother. So that means our oldest is headed towards her 24th birthday. And then we also have a 22-year-old, and then we took a 5-year break because we realized that we were in over our heads. You know, when you have those two first kids, you're like, oh, wait, what are we doing? So we took a 5-year break, and then we had a son. So he's 17, and then a 14-year-old daughter. And then this is kind of where our story becomes crazy, because then we were like, okay, we're good. Because after our 14-year-old daughter, we were told, because she was an emergency C-section because I tried a VBAC. So then we were told no more babies, right? And those of you that know our family know that there's been 3 more children since that. So then there was a move of foster care in our church. So we got licensed. We ended up with 2 adoptions, and then surprise of all surprise, a surprise baby. So that is our family. So we have the 4 older, so we have the 2 older daughters, and then we have our 2 teenagers, and then we have what we call the 3 little boys, and they are 12, 9, and 8.
So very close in age for those 3. And they have kind of a special relationship, don't they?
Yes. So the three little boys were added to our family in 2 years. So I was already pregnant with Harrison when Kendrick came into our family. So Kendrick and Harrison are just 13 months apart. But Maxwell is 2.5 years older than the babies. But he was added to the family about the same time. So they add a really fun dynamic to the family because they are their own little tribe. And because there's three of them, I've always said this is a two-parent job. Like whatever they want to do, that just kind of sucks the entire family that way. So and our lives are very defined between, oh, that was before the boys or after the boys, meaning that was before the three little boys were added to our family, or, it's just it was a very defining season of our family.
And so, how do you go from being overwhelmed with two children and needing to take a step back, 5 year break, to now you have seven kids?
I think that's one thing that only, like, I've been thinking about this a lot. I think God downloads things into us. Like, you know how your computer updates, and you got to download new apps. I think I worried about things with the first two. Um, and I didn't depend so much on God. And then as the family started growing, I was clearly I was in over my head. It's just what it felt like. But then the more you're in over your head, the more you depend on God, and that gives God the opportunity to download into you what he needs for you. But as long as you're like, I've got this, yep, we're good. I don't think there's any chance for those uploads to happen, or downloads, whatever it's called. Maybe it's downloads. The downloads from heaven. Um, um, but I would say it happened when I was like, I'm in over my head. Those are the moments when God started, uploading new levels that he wanted me to have.
And even before you really got into a bigger family, your story was already taking all kinds of twists and turns. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure a lot in my audience do not, can you kind of tell us a little bit about your journey from old order Mennonite to where you are today?
Sure. So my husband and I were both born and raised and lived the first 27 years of our life as old order Mennonites, which is very similar to the Amish. They drive horse and buggy. And then right before I got pregnant with our son, the bulk of this leaving happened when we just had the first two, and then we took a break. And I think that pause allowed us to be like, wait, how are we going to raise our children? What are our beliefs? And can we get behind why we don't drive a car? Like, are those personal convictions? Because our daughters were, to the age where they're like, well, why don't we drive a car? And even the questions like, why can we pay somebody to have a ride in their car, but we can't drive a car? So our daughters growing older started us asking those types of questions. Like, do we really have personal, convictions about this lifestyle, the old order Mennonite lifestyle? And so the very beginning of our journey starts with, we decided to homeschool instead of following, the Mennonites have their private schools. So it's very uncommon to homeschool because you have a, private school option. So because here in our community, there was very few people that homeschooled, I started searching outside of the Mennonite community for homeschool groups. One of the ladies I met there she's the one that first started planting the seeds of salvation, because she spoke about Jesus and God as if she had a personal relationship with them. And this really was like, wait, she wears pants. How does that work? Like, that's where I was. But I just filed it away because I'm like, I'm going to stand back and see what happens in her life. And then, because I was sure God was going to, not bless her in any way because she was wearing pants and jewelry. And so then another homeschool friend invited me to a ladies' day at their church. And that's when I met the presence of the Lord, and it changed my life. I mean, with like a worship song in 2 minutes changed my entire life, because I knew whatever I had found during that worship service, I didn't want to ever be without it. And so didn't know what it was, right? Nobody had explained to me at this time what the presence of the Lord was. So I didn't know what it was. So I came home and I started reading my Bible, like searching for what happened. And I think I shared with my friend that had invited me, and slowly I became educated on what it was. And so I brought the presence of the Lord back to our home, and I had a born again experience. So did my husband. And that's kind of the moment where we were like, okay, we have to go where the presence of the Lord is welcomed. And so that was our exodus. We're like, okay, we can't be here. I mean, there's a lot more to it, because you know that you don't leave the community and the religion that you were raised in without it being, chapters and chapters, you know.
Right. Right.
But that's kind of how we left that community and that culture and are now somewhere neither,
You're in a little bit of a no man's land.
Yes. And we're and I kind of our second daughter went to YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and we took her there, and God really um answered some questions I had when we visited there, because a lot of the youth that we met had Amish and Mennonite last names. So the culture is so divided that I can hear somebody's last name and be like, hey, you've got Mennonite in your lineage somewhere, right? Or Amish, because their last names are very unique to that culture. So as I was visiting with some of these youth, I'm like, you have Mennonite last name, you have an Amish last name. So I started asking, and I realized that a lot of these youth that were on fire for God and were gonna, wanted to change, reach people, they were second generation. Like their parents had been the ones to leave. And so I'm like, oh, it makes sense. We're going to survive in the modern world, right? We're the first generation out. We are in the generation that's just surviving. It's the next generation that you'll see really, really thriving. And if healing happens in our generation, you'll see the next generation thriving. So that kind of adjusted my vision. Instead of fighting so hard to be accepted by the modern world, it helped me readjust and be like, no, all I need to do is work on healing, and the modern world doesn't need to accept me.
Wow. So, how did I'm assuming that how you grew up shaped how you mother your children, how you raise your family today, because you still embrace those traditional skills, a lot of those values. But how did your motherhood change after you had that encounter?
It was a gradual process, because I had to, and I remember a very defining moment in my motherhood where basically God took me to time out. And because and I don't really know the exact words to explain it, but when you're from a culture where conformity, where acceptance in of the culture depends on how well you can conform, right?
Yeah.
So that really shapes who you are as a parent, because conformity, like if you're not accepted, you have to behave a certain way or you're an outcast. So that's really, really hard to break free from that as a parent, when your worth as a parent and your children's acceptance depends on how they behave. So there was this moment where I know God was dealing with me, but I thought I was dealing with a child. I thought I was dealing with this disobedient child, and God just brought me to the end of myself, and he was like, you can't make your child a good child. The child has to choose for themselves. And it changed that. It changed everything, because I'm like, oh, I have to parent the heart, because when the heart chooses to obey, it's a lifelong obedience. But when they conform just to escape mom's displeasure, that's just like this big. As soon as you turn your back, they're gonna forget it all, because I'm the only reason that they are conforming. But when we reach the heart of the child, and the heart of the child desires to please you, and then, as they grow, to be pleasing to God, that's the actual work of parenting. We can discipline and do, we can have consequences and all that. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that. But if we don't reach the heart of the child, you might as well just leave it, because you cannot only teach the outward body how to behave and conform. It has to be the heart.
That might be the richest insight anyone has shared on this podcast today. I was close to tears there for a
Oh,
time. Fantastic. And not only that you shared that, but that you received that you were aware of what was happening, what the Lord was trying to teach you in parenting. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, but we'll circle back. You said that there was foster care movement and you adopted 2 boys. I know that you have open adoptions with these boys. How has adoption shaped your family culture at home, and especially with them being open adoptions? And I know you have a specific reason for electing open adoptions, and you can share that certainly. But how has this shaped how your family operates?
I think it's given our family a chance to. I don't think I'm fully gonna grasp what having open adoptions means for our family until our adopted sons are adults, because right now we are being obedient and we're acting on the knowledge that we learned during foster care classes and from all adoptees I've spoken with, that for for the adoptive parents to truly love the birth parents is the most healing thing that you can do for an adopted child. So for us, it looks like it looks a lot like prayer. Like, people get scared and they ask, well, aren't you afraid that your sons are going to choose to go live with their birth parents when they are old enough? And we're not there. They're still, in elementary school. And does the thought cross my mind? It absolutely does. But I always bring it back to God is doing a work now that will not come back void when they are adults. And like, I don't know what it's going to look like when they are teenagers. It can be rough. And I've never been there with adopted children, but I know for now we are obedient by praying for their parents and, having the kind of relationship that their lifestyle and our lifestyle, you know, meeting somewhere in the middle. And it always feels sacred when they're in our home. It just feels sacred when we invite them into our home. And, everybody gets scared for us. Everybody worries. And I'm not saying that it's all going to be roses. I'm just saying we're being obedient for now. And one of the common questions is, do your adopted sons act out after, you spend time with their birth parents? And I would say there's definitely an unrest and they definitely have more questions. That I would rather, as parents, we would rather have them feel that, learn how to navigate those emotions, and ask the questions where we can answer them to the best of our knowledge. We'd rather have that happen now when they are, 9 and 10 years old, then have them suddenly need to deal with it on an adult level. So we get to shape the way they think and feel about everything that happened.
So good. And it reminded me, I know you've shared before, you have kind of a priority of mothering your household. I think it's emotional needs first, nutrition second, cleanliness third. Is that right?
Yes. So emotional needs take priority, and then it's nutritional needs, and then last of all is housekeeping.
And can you kind of explain or unpack how that progression needs to be for you? How you realize that this was a priority chart you needed to make?
So it all started when the three little boys came to our family. And I was already very conscious of nutrition at that point. Um, like that started years before. But when the three little boys got added to our family, in Harrison's birth, I said he was a surprise baby. We like without God's intervention, neither one of us would be here. So the recovery was rough. Not only did I have a newborn, not only, had I been near death, I also had a 13-month-old and an adopted 2-year-old. Like a recently adopted 2-year-old. So the emotional needs of so let's look at what ages the other children were during that time. Our oldest were 15 and 16. So I was brand new parent to teenage daughters. And then of course I had the middle children who were probably like 9 and 10. So the emotional needs of this household consumed my entire day. We did have a milk cow at the time. But there was no time for making butter. I had to put something down. And that's when I was like, okay, emotional needs are priority. And there was big emotional needs in our family. Um, so that's when every day I would just be like, okay, when there's a window where there is no emotional needs, or I feel like I can handle the emotional needs and still be in the kitchen, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to prepare in the kitchen when there's a window where there's no emotional needs. However, if there is too many emotional needs, we will eat less nutritional food tonight. And we're going to be okay with that. And God, as I started practicing that, God really started building something in me that helped me to understand that there's no eternal value in nutrition. Like the souls of our family, that's the eternal value. And so that needs to take priority. Now, and you know how it is when you have little ones. There is no like you can't push them off, right? If they have an emotional need, they have an emotional need and you got to drop everything. But then as they get older, like the age that my children are now, I feel like I'm very much in a testing land because it's easy for me to tell them, "Oh, not now. I'm making butter." So it's harder now than it was when they were all little because their needs were they were so open with their needs. And now the ages that they are, I have to practice more like dropping what I'm doing nutritionally and giving them my eye contact and my presence. Um, but over the years we started, our children now attend a private school. So I have a lot of time to get things done, and then I'm able to be more present when they are home. It's not like I'm trying to combine the two. I have more defined, like, okay, this is my time to work on nutrition, and then this is my time to just be with the kids.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
housekeeping, I've just decided nobody's going to remember how clean the house was once they're all grown up. That has zero eternal value.
Mm. I think it was the Boom podcast that I heard you share that, and I was like, man, if we as moms could get behind this philosophy of, because I'm a very visual person, and if I see mess or clutter, then I'm focused on it either until I go nuts because of it or it's not there. But instead of just focusing on the visual, if I could focus on the fact of does this have turn away or not a turn away? Are my kids going to remember their mom snapping because of, crumbs on the table or whatever the case may be? Or are they going to remember that I pointed to Jesus? If everything could be filtered through that lens, what a difference.
I think that's wisdom. For me, it comes down to understanding exactly what level of clutter I can handle. Like I can see it building and I'm like, uh-oh, it starts like distracting me because I can't handle clutter.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I can probably handle more than some people because some people's housekeeping standards are much higher than mine. Um, but the thing is to know, like, okay, today I have to make cleaning the house a priority because I can no longer parent with joy because the house is dirty. Like just giving yourself that, okay, I can feel this, and then not being guilty, just knowing your limits of, what's bothering me? This is what's bothering me. I need to today for a couple hours at least, I got to move this to the top because it's affecting the joy, and sometimes it affects our goal. Like it just kind of seems that I personally can't keep my goal of these souls have eternal value when there's clutter.
Yeah.
So knowing that, okay, for a couple hours today, I have to make housekeeping a priority. Otherwise I'm just going to battle this. I feel irritable when there's clutter.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about Harrison's kind of traumatic birth. Can you tell a little more about that? What happened?
So, I mentioned that our 14-year-old daughter, so our son, after the 5 years, our son was a C-section, and then I tried a VBAC with the next birth, and that was, I ended up with a ruptured uterus in the VBAC. So, no more babies, right? But because, like, when you get your tubes tied, you have to sign the paper 6 weeks prior to your due date or whatever. Um, so because I hadn't signed those papers, they wouldn't tie my tubes right there, on the table. So Harrison was, let me see, I think Hadassah was born in 2009. Harrison was born in 2016. So about 8 years, maybe. Harrison was born he was conceived against all odds, right? And I don't remember having fear during his pregnancy, even though it was life threatening. Um, I don't remember, being full of fear, but so he obviously was a scheduled C-section, and I went into labor before his C-section, before his scheduled date. And when they opened me up, my uterus had already ruptured. Um, so he was partially out of my uterus. There was scar tissue holding him in, and so he was born. And I think they opened me up wider than normal, and they didn't like squeeze him out like they do with C-sections to kind of compress their lungs and get all that fluid out. So he went. No, they did give him to me. So they sewed me back up. They went to recovery. They gave him to me, and I knew right away something wasn't right. Like he's not breathing okay. So then I started kind of, passing out, and they couldn't figure out where I was bleeding, but my blood pressure kept dropping anyway. So I was bleeding internally, and they opened me back up. He went to the NICU, and yeah, the rest is, I don't even know all the details, but I ended up in the ICU. They gave me 8 units of blood, 4 of plasma and platelets. And I remember the nurse being, in my face saying, you can't die. Like asking me to stay there. So yeah, when I woke up, they had a PICC line. All my veins had collapsed, everything. It was touch and go. So there was a lot of PTSD from that experience. But I do think that once I realized what post-traumatic stress disorder is, and I realized, oh, I have all these symptoms, that's when I really began to heal emotionally from that, because I was able to, recognize it, the triggers and work through it. But that all happened within that, first year, 18 months after Harrison's birth.
How, how, if, okay, I'm a little blown away because I had, I had heard that there was like, that you almost died, but then to think that you're recovering physically, emotionally, you know, mentally, maybe spiritually in some ways from just that that brief window of time in the hospital to coming home to having 3 little boys and then 4 older kids. I what was your what was your husband's like role in this time? Because he works outside of the home, right?
Yes. So my mom came and stayed for 2 weeks, I think. Um, and she really set things up well for me. And so then my husband and my teenage daughters just kind of took it from there. So when mom was here, she kind of, was like, okay, here's what you could do, the girls could each cook one night. Elvin could bring home supper on this night, and that would get you, through meals. Because I think my mom's biggest concern was how are we going to feed, this family. So that really, like, she kind of gave me, and the girls already were very skilled in the kitchen. Like they could handle meals for the family. Um, Especially with me present, maybe not in the kitchen, but there to answer questions and be like, hey, something's burning,
Right.
they were very skilled. But I remember we were in survival mode. It was pure simple survival mode because I remember being like, this baby is keeping my husband up at night. I mean, he's got to work. Like we were a one income family. And yeah, I don't remember much. I do remember this. I remember where my rocking chair was. I could see the rose bush out the window, and Harrison's born March 31st. And I watched the leaves and the buds, and I just watched them come to life. And that's what I remember most is that. And then I also remember mom planted my garden, and she came to get me from the house. She said, I want you to come down and see what I've done. And I remember when I got back to the house feeling like I had climbed Mount Everest, like I was just exhausted. Harrison was probably 3 weeks old at this time. And I remember crying, being like, I'm never going to be able to garden. Like, if I can't even walk to the garden and back, I won't be able to garden. And like gardening is life to me. But you know what? We raised some veggies that summer. It definitely wasn't the amount that we raise now. Um, but somehow I remember Elvin helping a lot more in the garden that summer than he does now, just because I'm very independent when it comes to my garden because I enjoy it so much. But I remember spending a lot of time as a family in the garden, and I remember I would sit on the blanket with the babies and supervise as they pulled weeds and did hoeing and things like that.
Wow. So talk to me a little bit about gardening because I think it was gardening that you ended up in my Instagram feed like way back. I don't know, 2019 maybe. Um, you live on a big homestead. Your kids are involved in all of the chores. You rotate chores. Do they prefer gardening with you compared to the other chores, or what is the dynamic there?
I do think it's not a biological child. Like one of my adopted sons is more interested in the garden than any of his of our biological children, and I always marvel at that. Because we expect DNA to play a certain role in what our children like and dislike. But I've also learned that as they become older, when they become adults, and it's not a requirement anymore, you can more clearly see what they most like. Um,
Yeah.
but yes, one of our adopted sons is more passionate about the animals and is more interested in the garden than any of our biological children. I would say they're all interested in the garden to a certain degree, and that would be like the raspberries or the cucumbers, the peas, the things that they like to eat. But when it comes to all the work, they will usually be like, "Oh, really? Must we?" They're very, very normal children, and especially they complain more about the garden, and here's why. It's not part of our daily routine, right?
Yeah.
So it's like maybe, I'm like, okay, today we're going to put all the stakes in the tomatoes and put the fence up. They're children. To me, it's routine. We do this every year. But their attention span is so short. It feels like I pulled this job out of thin air, and they don't, they don't know what to expect. Whereas our chores that we do are every morning. They don't complain about that. It's just part of our routine. They know what to expect. At the garden, I get more pushback because they have a short attention span.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective to keep in mind because like you say, you're like, we do this every year. Why are you
Yes.
surprised by it?
Didn't you see that the tomatoes need to be, No, they didn't.
Uh, so do a lot of your homesteading skills, the animals, the gardening, the canning, the cheese making, all of these things, do those really stem from your Mennonite background?
Yes, the gardening is in my blood. The Mennonite women for generations and generations have gardened as if their life depends on it. And we had a family milk cow growing up, so I'm very familiar with raw milk and all the things. My mom never did make cheese, so that is a new skill to me. But I still don't feel like I'm quite starting from scratch because I understand what happens I understand what clabbering means. I understand what happens when the milk has to acidify. And I'm familiar with raw milk. So, but everything else, yes, it's pretty much, even if I didn't do it personally growing up, I was, aware of the time and effort that goes into something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I love that you have picked up knitting. Knitting is
Yes.
something
So
that,
my grandma, I would spend some time with my paternal grandma. So when I talk with about my grandma, it's usually my paternal grandma. And my mom had 6 daughters. So there was too many girls in the house usually. So we take turns spending time at grandma's house. And he was a quilter, so she would sit and piece quilts together, and she would keep us busy. So she taught me how to crochet. So I knew how to crochet, basic stitches, but knitting was brand new to me. And I just decided it's something I would like to do, and I picked up a book and taught myself how to knit.
yeah, it's so much. Knit.
I
My
know.
maternal grandmother is who taught me, and I only ever knit when I was with her, so only a couple times a year. So it took me 8 years to finish my first dishcloth because there were a lot of mistakes to fix when we would get together. But
And
now I
see,
knit
her goal was not for you to finish a dishcloth as much as it was time with you.
exactly. Exactly. And so let's talk about the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren because you have your grandson Winston now, who I just love every time he lights up my Instagram feed. What is it like being a grandmother compared to being a mother?
Well, it's almost like I'm still having a hard time putting words to it, right? But your baby had a baby. So it's almost like it's double, like you get double the feelings and the love because it's your baby's baby. So I do sometimes wonder if my daughter feels neglected because she walks in the door and I'm just like, zoned in on that baby. But yeah, I'm loving every minute of it, and I'm very indulgent in our 5 youngest children that are still at home. They'll look at me and they're like, "You're just gonna let him pull all the tissues out of the box?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because it makes me happy to watch him. And you don't carry the same responsibility of like I got to make sure he turns into a good person. I don't carry that same responsibility. I carry more it feels to me more like my role is just to make sure that he knows he's loved. And so the other day we had my big flower bucket out, and I'm like, let's let Winston play in the flower bucket, And it made this huge mess, but it brought me so much joy to watch him feel that texture. And he's not at the age where he's going to start throwing it around on intentionally to make a mess. He's just simply exploring a new texture. And it just brought me so much joy to watch him, and he is a boy. So it took like 5 seconds for him to realize that, oh, the harder I push my hands in, the bigger of a cloud of dust I make. Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm excited for summer, um, to show him everything that grows in the garden. And he hasn't really been to the barn, to watch milk because it's really cold. But he notices the cows because they're up front. So every time he comes, he's looking for the cows.
Yeah, that's so sweet. And please don't stop sharing him with us on Instagram. It's always such a treat when he pops up in your story. I want to touch on something else. I know that you do things like a weekly family dinner. What are some other ways that you incorporate the whole family with sharing time together and making memories together?
Um, so the primary way that relationships are built is through shared experiences. And relationships that have a larger concentration of negative experiences, they are still relationships. They're just not relationships that we seek, to grow. So my goal whenever we're together, I mean, people are like both our married daughters live close by. So they're in and out. But what I try to keep in mind is every time we're together is to make it a positive experience, because that is what relationships are built on, is shared experiences. And if I can make those shared experiences positive experiences, then everybody wants to recreate them. So recently I started feeling at my younger children, and because we do a weekly family dinner, and I like to use, I don't want to use paper plates because, it's a little, we get pretty formal with family dinner, and but I started realizing that I had slipped into waiting until last minute kind of to prepare family dinner. And then the children would come home from school, and Friday is also our laundry day, right? So they would have laundry to fold, and then we'd have to, peel potatoes, and it started being a little stressed because I was expecting a lot from them. And then after dinner, then, oh, now somebody has to wash, all these dishes. And so I heard one of the little boys say, "Oh yeah, I forgot, it's family dinner." And I'm like, wait, that's not how even though the older kids are having a positive experience, it's a negative experience for the little boys because it really just means more work to them. And so I've started becoming more intentional about this is something I do for the family, and I need to prepare the food ahead of time if I can, and wash as many dishes as I can ahead of time. And then when the kids come home from school, all we have to do is fold the laundry and set a pretty table. And then, so I'm kind of taking back that time and making sure that it's a positive experience for everyone. And if that means I have to leave a bunch of the dishes for Saturday morning, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I love that approach. And I love that you heard the the complaint, and instead of, disciplining for complaining, really took it to heart as to what was at the root of that. That's so important. So how would you, I mean, first of all, let me just address the listeners and say, if you are not already following RuthAnn on YouTube or Instagram, go do that now. She's just a wealth of encouragement and like real life, real talk without, there's no soapbox. It's just you being genuine and sharing things as they are. And it's so relatable. But how would you right now encourage the moms who are listening who maybe feel lost or overwhelmed in chaos and aren't sure how to dig their way out, want to act in wisdom, but is just in response to the moment right now? How would you encourage that?
I think what I want to say to the young moms is when you feel like your life is like this minute, there's a different need every minute. That's okay. It's supposed to be that way. That teaches you to focus on the emotional needs of your family. And you're going to need that when they become older and their needs aren't as demanding. You're going to need that skill of being able to discern what the heart is saying. So it's very, very important that you become the expert on your children's emotional health. And that is why it feels like every minute there is a need, because God's downloading into you um, that skill to become the expert on your children's emotional needs. And you're going to need that skill because when they grow older, they're not crying in the middle of the night for you to come get them because they miss you. They'll let you know in much more subtle ways that they need you. And if you haven't become the expert on their emotional needs, you're going to miss it. So that's what it's supposed to feel like. Regardless of what the internet tells you, or regardless who you see on social media, out and about getting coffee and shopping or doing whatever, and you're stuck at home because there's no way you're going to take, 3 little ones out. That's how it's supposed to feel. That's what it feels like to be a parent. You barely leave your living room and you're exhausted.
Amen. And so one more thing that it doesn't really relate to motherhood, but it's one of the veins that I love, and I have you in front of me, and so I want to ask you, with regard to homesteading, how do you see where homesteading plays a role in family development and in your faith as well?
Well, number one, the homestead gives personally me a chance to be in nature a lot. And when I'm in nature, my senses seem to all be tuned into spiritual things. So that's how it grows my faith. Like I can't plant a seed and not worship. I can't see the sunrise every morning and not my thoughts are drawn, heavenward and how much God loves me. Even as simple as, I know I do it every morning, but when that warm milk hits the bucket and the steam comes up in my face, it feels to me like the love of God. Like there's just, to me, it's a lifestyle that feels like I'm working hand in hand with creation and the creator. And then as far as the family and our goal of eternal relationships, there's an endless amount of opportunity for shared experiences on the homestead. Like very little that we do is done alone. So it's either, me and 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of the kids, or it's 2 of the kids together. So just the opportunity to work together towards the same goal of getting food on the table, that to me, because at one point in parenting, you realize, and I realized this with my 3 little boys, I'm not always going to be here. They're going to have to have a relationship that withstands the test of time, because more than anybody else in the world, they know what built them. Like they know each other so well. And I started really wanting that for them. So it gives endless opportunity for those shared experiences that are going to build a relationship that should last a lifetime.
I couldn't have said a better answer myself, RuthAnn. It has been a treat among treats to have you on the podcast today. You have been an encouragement to me in my motherhood journey. I know that you will encourage the listeners as well. Thank you for being a guest on the Motherhood Experience.
Thank you, Val. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook or Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.